Welcome to the Future Media Podcast. I'm Ricky Sutton.
And I'm Alan Chappell. And this podcast goes deep into the collision of big tech
and the future of the world.
We explore how companies like Google, Meta, and Apple are impacting each of our lives.
I'm an investigative journalist.
I'm a privacy lawyer.
And every week we speak with experts to bring the unreported details into the light.
Hey, Ricky, how you doing?
Morning, Alan. How are things with you?
Things are good. I just spent the weekend with family down in Stuart, Florida. An entirely different world from NYC, I'll tell you that. Not to mention that it was literally 1,000 degrees down there.
Well, yes, as you know, it's freezing here. And so all the kids have been playing football this weekend, real football, English football. They're all suddenly losing their enthusiasm for it as the temperature drops to 4 degrees. We actually had snow here inland a little bit, which is not terribly usual.
Oh, wow. Okay. Not much surfing when it snows, I gather.
The surf gets great, actually, when it gets really cold because the wind drops. But you have to be brave and hardy.
That is so not me.
All right.
So today we are going to talk about TikTok, and we've talked about TikTok in the past, but there's some new stuff that's sort of percolated over the last couple of days. And so let me dive in with some background. What do you think?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So in late 2024, a group of state AGs led by New York and California filed a suit alleging that TikTok had violated state laws, falsely claiming its platform is safe for young people. The complaints allege that many young users are struggling with poor mental health and body images due to the platform's addictive features, and that children are getting injured, hospitalized, or dying because of dangerous TikTok challenges. And we talked about this on previous pods. I think it was the blackout challenge that we talked about a bit, and that those challenges are created and promoted on the platform. So TikTok had urged the judge in the case, Justice Anar Patel, to dismiss the case at an early stage, arguing in a motion filed in January that Section 230, I think your favorite law, Section 230 of the Federal Communication Decency Act had barred the claims. And we'll get back to Section 230 because I think it does play a part here. So in late May, which is just a week or two ago, the New York State Supreme Court Judge Anar Patel had denied TikTok's motion to dismiss. Now, in my view, TikTok is almost certainly going to appeal, and a lot of the conventional wisdom is pointing to a recent Second Circuit Court of Appeals decision that had ruled that Facebook's use of algorithms is in fact protected under Section 230 of the CDA. So, lot to unpack here. Do you want to start off with some thoughts?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is that for years and years and years, these tech companies haven't really faced any challenges at all under these laws. They've been free to just keep growing. But I think eventually public opinion has turned so heavily against it that now judges and state attorney generals in the US are feeling the need to take action. So I think that's meaningful. I think we're actually seeing kind of parent power actually coming to the fore here. That gives me great hope, actually. That's the whole point of having these laws, is so that when the populace says that something has to happen, something does happen. And so I'm very happy that that's beginning to happen. I'm also seeing that, TikTok is getting a slew of these cases right now. And I imagine it's kind of politically fashionable at the moment to go after TikTok. So there's an element of that. And I'd be really unhappy were it not for the fact that I'm also seeing cases being brought against Meta. We've got the antitrust trial, obviously, that's ongoing. We've got more cases coming. And so it does feel like there's a bit of a turning of the tide, which is interesting. So I'm not entirely sure this would have gone ahead a year ago or maybe even 2 years ago. But the fact it is now gives me great hope, actually.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. And I want to give the attorney generals some props here for what I think are some rather creative pleadings. I think that where these had gone previously, to your point, a year or 2 years ago, is they'd gone directly after the algorithmic decision making made by the tech platforms. And the problem with using that approach is it runs headlong into Section 230 issues. Now, we may say, well, we don't like that, and it results in outcomes that make us uncomfortable. But the reality is that, Section 230 is still on the books, and it makes pleading directly as to the algorithmic decisions being made or the content being posted as being problematic. But what's creative about these pleadings, it almost reminds me of some of the pre-Section 230 social networking laws, where Prodigy got into some trouble way back in the day. And the reason they got themselves into some trouble is that they had billed themselves as a family-friendly, they didn't call it a social media platform, but a family-friendly experience. And those assertions caused them some grief downstream, because it turned out that not the entire experience was not exactly family friendly. And I think that TikTok is sort of coming up against something similar here. They were making claims that the platform, it protects children, and they had a whole bunch of systems in place that were designed to limit screen time on TikTok. And they were making a whole bunch of representations that they were offering for kids a kid-friendly environment. And so that claim sort of opens the door to state-level, mostly what they call UDAP claims, where the state AGs are essentially saying that the claims that TikTok was making regarding offering a child-friendly environment were false or deceptive. And then they came up with a whole bunch of evidence supporting those claims. Now, all that stuff sort of circumvents the whole discussion around Section 230. Section 230 does come up in one instance, and we'll get to that. But overall, you have to applaud the creativity of the state AGs in how they've pursued this.
Yeah, I get that. And I also appreciate that I'm starting to see a situation where the court cases are being brought based on common sense thinking rather than just stern law. So I don't think there's really anyone in the world, frankly, that would say that TikTok doesn't target kids. I think it's very clear. You only have to look at the product to see that's what it does. Secondly, does it have addictive features? Well, to be honest, the entire conversation in the tech community about TikTok is that its genius is its addictive features, and the fact that it keeps you on there for longer. So these are just common sense realizations. Like you, though, I went and read the court papers because I always try and find something that's new, because there are old and hackneyed and completely proven arguments that I hear a lot. But then you try and find the things that are new. And what I'm starting to see more and more in these cases is the data starting to flow through, that these states and their organizations have begun to gather. So I'm just going to quote a little bit for you from what I saw in the papers from the New York Attorney General. It says that TikTok is not reasonably safe and was defectively designed to addict young users who are particularly vulnerable and unable to appreciate the risks posed by the platform and are thus susceptible to harm. Now, like I said, I think that there isn't really anybody that would disagree that that's probably about right. But then they started to go into detail about how it's actually being felt on the streets of New York. So she says, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and suicidal ideation have all reached record levels among children in New York and elsewhere. And over the past 15 years, New York has seen a steady increase from 27% to 38% of high school students who reported feeling sad or hopeless. Suicidal thoughts have risen from 12% to 16%. And then, of course, there are all the studies that show just how prevalent TikTok is amongst that youth community. And we have really simple rules, don't we? We don't allow kids to drive cars. We don't allow them to play with fire when they're very young. We don't let them have guns. We have rules to protect people when they're younger, except here. And this is the thing that they're using most. And so that's what I mean when I say it feels like common sense is starting to enter the law, where this is actually about people, not profits, and not, it's actually about the best outcome for young people rather than just the law as it was written.
Yeah, I think that there's something to that. But in addition to that, you can point to specific features that TikTok is offering, and then you can point to evidence that those features might be causing some of the harms for children that the AGs are complaining about. I mean, the one that struck me was the use of filters, and they had a picture somewhere in the complaint of a young girl who, in her regular, her regular picture looked one way, and the filtered picture kind of looked like a supermodel. Now, I'm not a psychologist, but I can only imagine that the use of that type of a tool is creating all kinds of body image issues, particularly for younger people.
Yeah, and you're going to see that come up again in the Meta case later in the year. These filters, started on these social media platforms and were, of course, really appealing to kids because kids could use this to post pictures about who they wanted to be rather than who they actually were. But there's a ton of evidence now by universities and even by the platforms themselves that shows that this leads to a very severe damage in dysmorphia and personal image, and making kids feel depressed about who they are and not who they want to be. And so that's always been a problem with social media for me, is that, people are able to pose on their best lives, okay? And in many cases, it's not their best lives. It's actually a life they want to have that may not be entirely accurate. And when you take that away and you've told all your friends that's who you are, and then that's not actually who you are, that can lead to real problems with depression and being unhappy with your life. And that leads to all kinds of new problems if you're not emotionally mature enough to be able to cope with that.
And that's just it. No, there's a debate, a legitimate debate within society around the value of some of those filters and what they do. And hopefully that debate is being had. I fear it's not, but that's almost a different discussion for a different day. Because when you're talking about kids, you're supposed to be protecting them. And you should not be allowing, in the same way that we know intuitively as parents, you can give your kid a sip of the coffee or the wine, but if you do much more than that, or if you let them just, handle their own dosage of the coffee or the wine, you're going to run into some problems. And I think that analogy bears out here, where it's not even just TikTok, where a lot of social media platforms are offering these tools for kids that don't have any understanding of how those things are going to impact them.
Yeah, so they talked in the court papers again, though, something I was really interested in. They actually started to call out what these addictive features were. Now, the funny thing is that if you go to Silicon Valley and you talk to some of the smartest possible people you could imagine, they will talk about these as growth hacks. They'll say, these are the really clever things that we innovated. Aren't we smart? And so, for all social media platforms, there's a feed that's algorithmically driven that tries to identify the things you like and then sends you more of what you like, which on the face of it seems to make an awful lot of sense. Then you've got the idea that your video automatically plays into the next video and the next video and the next video and the next video, and it learns what you'll watch and watches to the end and then uses those to create more ways to what they call engage you or keep you on the platform. They have this endless scroll. You can scroll on TikTok or on Facebook forever, or Instagram forever, and you'll never get to the end of it. You've got live, you've got push notifications. This comes up a lot in the case, actually. It's the first time I've seen these brought up. The fact that people's phones are beeping and beeping and beeping all day and night, giving them that hit to go back and have another look at something else. And then, of course, there's the likes and the comments, the reinforcement piece from your community. All of these things are things that Silicon Valley are incredibly proud of, that they call growth hacks. What this court case alleges is that these are really harmful, addicting tools, and we have to rein them in. And I think that is going to be a real culture clash between what has been kind of accepted as okay and what isn't perhaps okay.
Yeah, and to build on what you just said, there's a number of instances within the complaint where they point to internal TikTok documents. Now, a lot of the comments on those in the complaint are redacted, but you don't have to be, a sleuth to figure out that the AGs believe that they're holding a straight flush here, and that there is a couple of different smoking guns, to continue to mix metaphors, around evidence that TikTok is in possession of that bolsters some of the claims being made. And that's not a great place for TikTok to be.
No, I got the sense I saw that too. And one of the things that I did see, though, that wasn't redacted, which I think was just a note of warning to the TikTok lawyers, just to say, I wouldn't just come too guns blazing on this, because we've probably got, we've got the stuff here. We've got the information. There was one line that I saw wasn't redacted, and I think this is what that was. It was a signal, and it said, it was a TikTok founder, and it said, teenagers in the US are a golden audience. Note that TikTok's Chinese owned. So this was one of the Chinese founders. It says, teenagers in the US are a golden audience. If you look at China, the teenage culture doesn't exist. The teens are super busy in school studying for tests, so they don't have the time and luxury to play social media apps. Now we've got a situation where TikTok is used by hundreds of millions of people in America, and it's the perfect market for a product built in China. So not only do you have child protection, and you have addiction, and you have dysmorphia, and you have public safety, and you have ambitious American state AGs, you also have geopolitics in the mix. And you have a potential ban of TikTok that I think is in another stay at the moment. And so this thing really is a melting pot of cultures and protection and the future of media. There's a lot going on, Alan.
Oh, there sure is. I'm struck by the number of examples of specific tools that TikTok has in place to purportedly protect kids. And again, I don't have access to all the documentation that the state AGs have, but when they're pointing to things like the 60 minute per day limit, the take a break videos being sent to kids who were on for too long, the feed refresh, some of the community guidelines, and then there's even the restricted mode. But to the extent that those don't work or they are easily circumvented, then all of the claims around we protect kids or we provide a kid-safe environment here, all of those claims come under some scrutiny and are potentially actionable under various state UDAP laws.
We must be at the point now, I would hope, that we've recognized that we shouldn't listen to what the tech platforms say. We should look at what they do. Okay, so I find it quite astonishing. I've covered so many court cases over my career. It would be probably in the 1,000 now. I might even have reached 1,000 cases, not on tech, but on everything. And the evidence is really clear. You don't listen to what someone says and accept it as true. You hear what they say and you challenge it with the facts. And that hasn't been what's happened with big tech for a long time, perhaps because technology has been so complicated and so fast emerging, or perhaps because it's been so valuable for shareholders and so comfortable and so useful for governments. Maybe it's because it's made countries look extra special or exceptional. There are a million different reasons, but they haven't really been exposed to the same rules and rigors of the law, it seems. And, I sat in many of the early tech cases and heard them say things that just didn't pass the reality test, but it was just kind of accepted that that was okay. It now starts to feel like, okay, maybe we're reaching late stage Web 1.0. Maybe we're at the point where everything that kind of was okay, we've experimented with and we've let this thing run wild for as long as it's gone. But now's the time to actually just say, well, all right, so here's what we've learned through this past 25 years. This is what works, what doesn't work, and we can now really see, factually prove the impacts of these things, okay? It's like when people first started smoking, it took a long time for people to eventually figure out that this was harmful, or that cars didn't need seatbelts, and then they did. And you need some time and some data to get to the point where you realize you need guardrails. And I don't think that anybody really thinks that there shouldn't be some level of protection now attached to social media, given it's so deeply entrenched in the lives of our children. See, the problem with social media for me, well, there are many, but one of the ones that really worries me is just how attractive it is to kids. It's a brilliant time filler for active minds. It's a brilliant social feedback tool for people that can't be with their friends all the time. It's a brilliant way for them to discover things that they wouldn't otherwise have access to. And because everybody in there is spinning up their lives to 20 or 30% beyond reality, it becomes a fantasy wonderland for kids that looks like the best thing ever and means they have to be there 8 times an hour. But the problem is that it's not real and it's empty calories. Yeah. And it's not filling their minds at all. It's filling their time and selling advertising. And that is the real damage. I want to use one more quote from the court papers. And this is from a little while ago, but this was the one from the US Surgeon General, who really put the cat amongst the pigeons by putting a report out a little while ago warning about the dangers. And what he says here is the best designers in the world who have designed these products, if we tell a child, use the force of your willpower to control how much time you're spending, what you're doing is you're pitting a child against the world's greatest ever product designer. I think that's about right. And of course, kids are going to love that because social media looks more attractive and more interesting than sitting down for dinner with their parents.
Oh, of course. Of course. And it's just really remarkable how far gone a lot of this stuff has really become. I think that we will look back on this era, and there's a whole bunch of things I think we can learn from them. But one that's pertinent here is that the tech companies have sort of shot themselves in the foot because when the regulation comes, it is not going to be kind. And it's probably taken a little longer for it to get there than some of us would like. But just take a look now. You've got a whole bunch of states who, it's relatively easy to influence federal lawmaking in the U.S., particularly over the last decade and a half, because it's really whoever has the most money has the most influence. I mean, that's not even a dirty little secret anymore. Much, much harder to do that at the state level, either via, lobbying, 50 different state legislatures, but also, then the AG has their own, agenda and goals. So what I think you're starting to see happen is a coalition of states who have recognized that on many issues, the federal government has failed us and failed us horribly. And so the states are going to step in. Now, look, there are places where I don't think the state input or influence or actions are helpful. But overall, it's really difficult to criticize someone who has come into a complete void. And that's where we are right now.
Yeah, look, I'm going to add a bit of controversy on the top of this. Maybe this will people will agree or disagree. Okay, but you see, the thing is that social media was effectively created by Mark Zuckerberg. Okay, there were other goes beforehand, but it was Mark Zuckerberg who really perfected the whole concept of it. And here's the controversial bit. He was a child when he created it. And so it helps if you are building the thing that appeals to you most. So if you're a genius, which I think anybody would say that Mark Zuckerberg is a product genius, he's created incredible value from an idea, but he was only a child when he created this thing. And so as a result, if you're a child and then you create something that the entire world says you are a fantastic genius about, and it makes you the 4th most valuable person in America, then your perspective has to be skewed to believe that the thing that you have created is truly fantastic. Now, is it fantastic at making money? Yes. Is it fantastic at getting people to use it? Yes. Is it fantastic at addicting its users? Yes. Is it great for advertising? Yes. All of these things are true. Is it good for the world, though? The answer is probably no, but you don't care because you haven't been taught to believe that that's something that matters. And so I write a lot about what I view as the priority of profit over people. Okay, what I call dollars over cents, SENSE. there's no doubt whatsoever these things make huge amounts of money and have perfected advertising. Okay. But we had many rules in advertising about what you could and couldn't do. You're not allowed to advertise to children on TV, right? And so these kinds of rules, well, actually, I don't know if that's true in America. It's certainly true here in Australia and in the UK.
Oh, no, you're allowed to. There was actually a huge, so one of the reasons we're in the place that we're in is there was a huge controversy in the 1970s where the then Federal Trade Commission stepped in and really went after children's advertising. And the business community flipped out in part because of the Saturday morning cartoons, which became, even back then, were like a staple. So that's probably a little longer winded than you wanted, but yeah, we don't have that type of protection here.
Well, that's another piece to add to this jigsaw then, is that, you know, America is the home of the American dream. It's the most commercial country on earth, probably. And so you probably have a slightly laxer view, or more lax view, laxer doesn't exist, the more lax view of what you can and can't do. But in most countries in the world, that's just not permitted. You're not allowed to target advertising at kids here or in the UK. And so in that scenario, I think it's fair to say that social media was created by young people when they needed the kind of dopamine hits that social media delivers. And for them, it's been absolutely fantastic. For its hundreds of billions of users worldwide, has it? I think that you're right. I think history is going to record that this has been a very poor period for us to protect kids. And, you know, in the same way as we're seeing, you know, a breakup happening now of Google, we have challenges to all of the major tech companies happening. You know, I said on stage in New York last 2 weeks ago that I think that we're reaching the end of kind of Web 1.0, the Wild West web. Let's let it run, see how far it goes, and we'll figure it out later. I think that period is coming to an end. It's taken 25 years. It's been an amazing social experiment, but I think it's probably coming to its end. And what we're going to see now is some rules and regulations that the tech guys are going to hate. It's going to shake up the web that we've got, but the web we end up with might be a better web. And it may be a slightly more controlled web, but actually for society, it might well be a better web.
Well, one thing that I find really interesting as a result of all this is, you know, I think there's a decent chance that Section 230 is going to be significantly amended over the next year or so. And, you know, the reason Section 230 worked when it worked was because those who were subject to it made some flavor of good faith effort at moderating the content. And at this point, I think it's fair to say that most of the social platforms have completely abdicated that responsibility. Now, they've done so for political reasons and for expediency and because it's really hard to do and really hard to do it well. But the net is, if you're not going to do anything, you are going to, particularly when it comes to children, you open yourself up to a significant political shift, which I think is going to land us somewhere around either a partial or a total repeal of Section 230, or at least a reimagining of it via the court system.
Has your mind changed on 230 in the past year or two?
I think that my mind has changed in that my eyes are more opened to the reality that status quo isn't working either. And so, you know, for all of the, well, get rid of Section 230 and you're going to blow up the internet, I have a similar problem with that argument. It's almost like the argument of the folks who say that the Second Amendment in the U.S., the right to bear arms, is completely unlimited. Because and then you have all of these school shootings, and I don't think that you can approach any law and say, oh yeah, that bad stuff happens. Well, what you going to do? Section 230. And I think that's where we're sort of landed within a decent swath of the legal community. And so sooner or later, that energy is going to have to go somewhere. And I think that's leading towards a repeal. Now, I fear, and I still fear, that the repeal or the adjustment is going to have a whole bunch of bad consequences. But I don't know what to do at this point because it doesn't seem like those who are supposed to be moderating in a good faith way are really doing that.
Yeah, look, for everybody that from the media industry, you should really know what Section 230 is. So Section 230 is a law passed in '96, I think it was, Alan, that basically says that platforms that publish content that's been produced by somebody else, the platform's not liable for that. So in the same way as if you say something abusive down a telephone line, the telephone company isn't responsible for that. The challenge with it in a digital context is, as Alan says, the tech companies have taken this as a heat shield, effectively a get out of jail free card, and said, well, we can just publish anything you want. And that's enabled them to scale wildly. And the funny thing is, it makes commercial benefit from doing bad things is the outcome at the end of it. And so you end up with bad things being published that no one's responsible for. And there's been court case after court case after court case on this. The other less talked about impact of this has been that it has disincentivized quality content creation. And that sounds like a reach, but I'll tell you why that's happened, is that it costs a lot of money to run a media company, and it costs a lot of money to create premium content. But if the premium content that you're creating is then sold at the same price as cheap junk or hate speech by an algorithmically run advertising server, then you end up with a situation where whatever creates the loudest voice and the most outrage makes the most money, and the premium high quality content that cost a lot to make can't cover its costs. And so what Section 230 in its late stage has ended up doing is completely creating an uneven playing field for the premium end of the market against the lower end of the market. And so no publisher can afford it. Now, in conversations that I've been having with publishers, I've been saying to them, what do you want to do about Section 230? What would be your preferred model for a post-Section 230 world? And half of them don't know anything about 230, which is pretty frightening given that it's been around for 30 years. But the second part of it is that the Section 230 rule either needs to apply to everybody equally, at which point it's a level playing field, or it doesn't apply to everybody, okay? At which point you have a level playing field. But you can't have a two-tier system that prioritizes and promotes and profits best for the lowest end of the market, because that creates a down market pressure on all content. And I think that social media has headed where it's headed specifically and precisely because of that reason. If Section 230 had applied and contempt of court had applied and defamation had applied and hate speech rules had applied and all the other rules that applied to social media, I think we'd end up with a very, very much improved social media. But the incentives have not pushed to that. It's pushed to something else, which has pushed us downhill and has led to where we are now, which is that, you know, we've got kids addicted to tools that are amazing, that look fantastic for them, but are actually making them really sad and leading to a wave of teen addiction, teen suicide, and frankly, the saddest things you can possibly imagine. And that isn't what Section 230 wanted, and I think it's not what social media wanted.
Agreed, yet here we are.
Well, that's right. And so Section 230, a repeal, it's interesting to hear you say, because I know we've been talking about this a lot, to hear you say that you think it's headed for a repeal in the next year or two. I'm really heartened by that. And I do hear you again on your point that, you know, I'm worried about what comes out the end of this. It's funny, again, it comes back to the conversation I had with all the publishers in New York just 2 weeks ago. They were like, well, if Google gets broken up, that's going to lead to chaos. And I'm like, that is exactly what's going to happen. But that's honestly, that's really what you want. In a world where you have monopoly, you have zero chance at winning. In a world of chaos, you have some chance of winning, and it's survival of the fittest. And that's what leads to innovation, competition, and opportunity. And it feels the same way with Section 230 to me. I agree that politicians and lawmakers are gambling with the future of the open web and gambling with safety protections that will literally lead to people surviving or dying. I understand, but that is the job of the law. and you're the lawyer, by the way, but the law exists to learn from experience, to use case law to create better law so it refines and improves and becomes more robust over time. We're 25 years into this era. It's brand new. Maybe it's time for some new laws that build on what we've learned from the last 25 years, recognizing that we'll need to refine them again in 5, 7, 10, 20, whatever years it takes. But that's the way that good law is created.
Yeah, I would agree. We'll see if it happens, though. It's I think that there are very few friends at the federal level politically. There are very few friends of Section 230 right now, and so really, what we're waiting on is the current president to just decide that that's the direction that he wants to go into. Because I think once he does, and I think he will eventually, once he does, there are going to be very few who are willing to stand up for Section 230.
Yeah, I think the analysis I've heard on this is that it's on the roadmap, but it's not near the top of the roadmap yet. Right? So he's not reached that point yet. But what is interesting is that Section 230, I'm a strong proponent for a repeal of 230, okay? My personal opinion is that there are laws that exist that already govern content that's published that can easily extend to the digital arena, okay? Here's a way to put it into layman's terms. So when I was running a media company in Australia, I was running the video team. And one of the board members, he's not going to thank me for telling this story, but one of the board members turned up one day with a box full of smartphones and said, hey, I want to give everybody in the newsroom a smartphone so they can go outside and shoot video. And then that video can then fill our news sites. And I thought really long and hard during the board meeting how I was going to respond to this idea that you were just going to give a whole load of people the opportunity to shoot with a phone with bad audio and grainy video, how that was just going to fill the site with junk. And I thought about it for a long time. And then it came to me right towards the end of the meeting when I just said to him, look, if we're going to give every reporter in the office a video camera on a mobile and tell them to go and shoot video, why don't we give all the readers a pen and ask them to write the paper? Yeah. What you're going to end up with is more, but it's not going to be better. It's just going to be more. And that's really how I feel 230 and social media has created. We've created a more business model, not a better business model, or not even an acceptable business model. We've just created more means more, not better means more. And that ultimately leads to a collapse in quality. And in my personal opinion, I don't think it's too much of a reach. I think the history books will prove this. It's led to sadness, depression, polarization, anger, hate, and it's led to a lot of the problems we have within our democracy, where we have given the extremists a foghorn and the ability to go mad. We've given the public a pen, and not everybody's penmanship is the same.
Yeah, and look, there's a place for that. And that's great. The problem is that thing is sort of taken over for what used to be called journalism or writing or photography, and that's a shame. But that's sort of where we are.
But it makes the most money.
Yeah.
So we know already that outrage is what drives the largest amount of human engagement, which is logical. I think actually if there's been an experiment that this has done for us, it's shown us what humanity's actually like beneath the covers. And so I suppose, some of that's ugly. And so hopefully we can take our lessons from what we've learned from this. But we do have an opportunity here to reset, okay? And the rule of law exists for again, I'm getting very metaphysical about this. I'm getting very, very high in my helicopter view of the world. But law exists to maintain order and safety of the populace. It's about ensuring that we don't run into civil wars. We don't create fury and anger amongst our populations. We don't destroy democracy if the democracy is the political model that we've chosen. But if you choose not to apply the law, you can't be surprised if ultimately those are the things that come under attack most. And Section 230 is not a law. Section 230 is a heat shield. It's a get out of jail free card. And to your point, used the way it was intended, it would have made sense, but it hasn't been used the way it's been intended. And that's why getting rid of it has to be the right thing, in my opinion, to do. And for all of the pure play and free speech advocates of the open web, I get it. I do get it. But I'm afraid you've abused the power. And eventually, if you abuse the power, it gets taken away. And the web we've got isn't the web that anyone signed up to 25 years ago. It's a wild west web that's only going to kill itself if it continues on the path it's on. And eventually, you just have to protect it.
Yep. I think that's well said.
I'm sorry if that was a bit strong, but I care passionately about the future of the open web. I was, I think you know this, Alan, but I was born in Africa, right? And so I've seen a lot of poverty, and I've been a war correspondent. So I know what disinformation and misinformation looks like when it reaches its extremes. And so I have some worldview on this kind of stuff. And the open web felt to me, when it first began, when I first started using it in the late 90s, as an opportunity to teach the world better information, for opportunity and information to be socialized to everyone, to be democratized to the entire world. Hasn't become that. It's become a shouting match. And that really upsets me. But we can fix it. And you know, you're a super smart guy. There are so many super smart people working in the law. You know how to fix this. It won't be perfect the first time, but nothing is, right?
Yeah, that's fair. And just bringing it back to TikTok and the state AG's case, it's really fascinating to me, because I think you're going to see what happens once the heat shield is removed. Because in my view, leaving aside, I think, some of the allegations regarding the blackout challenge, because that's an algorithmic decision. I think they're going to have a hard time getting that through because of Section 230 claims. But the rest of them has almost nothing to do with Section 230. These are straight, you've said X, and you've said X to protect children, and here's examples of X not happening. And so whether or not the state AGs ultimately prevail here, all this is almost certainly going to make it past the initial motion to dismiss. And so what that means is that we're going to have, sometime in the upcoming months, another public trial. And this one will be maybe a little closer to home for me. Maybe it's being in New York, I'll be able to attend.
Every single time one of these takes place in a public trial, and the reason that you have public courts is so the public opinion can be impacted by it. And so I think it's going to be really damaging. You mentioned earlier on the blackout challenge. So just want to go back to this, because this is also a TikTok issue. So the blackout challenge, for those who don't know, was a game that was marketed and promoted on TikTok, which encouraged people to effectively asphyxiate themselves to a certain point, which is insane. And the very thought that this is okay and you should be putting this live and algorithmically promoting it is complete lunacy. But anyway, that's what they did. And a 10-year-old girl called Nyla Anderson hanged herself in her wardrobe and died. And TikTok, the parents sued. Like, what a surprise. Of course they sued. That's what the parents should do. And TikTok immediately argued that by promoting this, it was covered by Section 230. Now, I have to say that any lawyer that is willing to get up in court and defend something like that, I just don't know how they get out of bed in the morning. I find that totally baffling. But this 10-year-old child died after being told by TikTok's algorithm that this is what she should do and it would make her cool. That's I'm lost for words as a parent. But what I will say is that the court has said that Section 230 won't apply here, and that the parents can go ahead and the parents can sue. Now that is fantastic, because now we're going to get to see what I said to you before, Alan. You know, the court of public opinion, the pub test says, actually, you know what, we shouldn't be hanging 10-year-old kids. That just kind of feels like something that's gone too far. These are the things that punch holes in that Section 230 argument. And when we've reached that stage, I mean, if we were to rewind the clock, Alan, 15, 20 years, and say, do we think it's okay for a kid to go online and be told to hang herself in the bedroom and then do it? We'd probably think that was a bad thing. It feels like the world's really got itself into a tangle when we're sitting and chatting about it a few years later, and that kind of feels like something that should be defended by the law. I think we've lost perspective at that point.
One of the beauties of law, not to do a little commercial here for the legal profession, but one of the things that makes the law really wonderful, really dynamic, and really effective is that there are often multiple roads to get at the same harmful behavior. And I think that's what we found here, where there is a big brick wall called Section 230, and plaintiffs, drove up into that. And, at some point you realize, okay, well, maybe I need to try something different. And that seems to be what the state AGs have done, which is why I started this with commending them for some creative pleading, because that type of claim, look, I have no idea who's going to win this, but that type of a claim, again, gives them a chance to prevail. Whereas as it's currently constructed, I don't see going up against Section 230 as being a fruitful option.
So let's talk about there's something else in the paperwork for this case brought by New York. It's New York's AG, isn't it? Letitia James that's brought this one.
It is, but I think it's a couple of I think it's 16 or 17 AGs, and the states are really becoming more effective at this more generally, where they're starting to create little coalitions on a whole bunch of issues, which I think is smart.
Yeah, I think so too. And so I was just going to make the case that this case is brought by New York, but there are also cases brought in Massachusetts, and there's cases brought in Utah, all against TikTok. But what is really interesting is each of them is subtly attacking a slightly different bit of the business. And I suspect that there is a coalition in action here. I think they are all investigating an element of the business that in combination has the effect of achieving the outcoming goal. So here's the interesting thing about my piece, the piece I read in the New York case, is that it claims that the company lies and has engaged in repeated and persistent fraud to build its $16 billion US business. So it says that it has lied to the market about the child protections that it has in place to make profit. So that's that attack, okay? Repeated and persistent fraud is what New York said, which is interesting. It says it lied to users about privacy, targeting kids, harmed the kids, hid the damages that they knew it did. The ergo fraud. Interesting. Massachusetts, though, has a different one. It says that TikTok assiduously achieves massive profits, again, but by deploying self-described coercive design features on its platform, specifically designed to take advantage of the psychological and emotional vulnerability of young users. There's a slight difference there. But Utah's case is really interesting. Utah says, quotes, for years, TikTok has profited. You'll notice profits always in the first two lines. Has profited from manipulative design features that contribute to the emotional, financial, and sexual, this is their difference, exploitation of children. Through a feature called TikTok Live, users can stream live videos of themselves and interact with viewers in real time. Combined with TikTok's virtual currency, TikTok has a currency that you can buy access to things. Combined with this virtual currency system, this feature allows adults to prey on children in many egregious ways, including by transacting with and soliciting sexual acts from minors. Despite knowing and facilitating these dangers, the company turns a blind eye because Live has helped make TikTok very rich. So states are taking slightly different attacks on all of the pillars of these social media companies. And Alan, I think you're right. One of the things that I keep hearing from the DOJ and also from lawmakers and regulators around the world is that there is an unprecedented level of communication and cooperation between all these organizations that haven't always worked or played nicely together. And now they are, because they're trying to fix something that's global and really troubling. So I really like this, and I think there's probably never been a more important time to be a state AG.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there is no shortage of really valuable, meaty issues for a state AG to champion. And boy, if the if you ever want to get elected to be governor, and that is often the ambition of somebody who comes into a state AG's type of a role, uh, you can get there by protecting children. And so there's sort of an incentive for that.
I was going to say exactly that. My learnings from working with politics for way too long now is honestly that politicians do whatever is in their self-interest, okay? And because they have been, in the same way as Mark Zuckerberg was designed to drive engagement, that was his view of the world. If you're a politician, your self benefit is from getting elected, okay? And so therefore you have to do whatever the public talks to you about first in one of your town halls. And more and more and more often now, the parents are talking to the politicians about, please protect my kids from social media. As soon as that's on the politician's agenda, the politicians will make decisions that change laws that get them elected, and you end up with a better world. This is democracy in action. So I don't think that we should necessarily feel that this is a bad outcome. This is just how the system we've created works. It's taken too long, but it's happening now everywhere on earth. And I'm absolutely thrilled, frankly, that I was beginning to lose faith. It had been too long. 25 years was an awful long time to allow this thing just to keep running faster and faster and more dangerously. In my mind, I kind of see a hamster on a hamster wheel that's going like spinning at, 3,000 RPMs a minute. Okay. The hamster's going to die. That's kind of what's happened here. Okay. And now politics and politicians and the law are halting the wave. And so I'm thrilled. Look, there are going to be, you and I started looking at this law stuff. I mean, you've been at it for years, but I really started to look at these legal changes 2 years ago. It started off as, one case every 3 months or so. It's now a case a week. So there is clearly a growing momentum here. So I was on stage the other day and somebody said to me, so would you ever take a job at Google? I said, only in the legal department. Because they are going to be busy and busy and busy. And I think that's true for every major tech company now. This is a legal assault on all sides. And I don't think they can defend themselves. It's just constant, relentless tidal wave of public opinion.
So what's going to be interesting about all of this energy that seems to be making its way into the state level, well, will there be a reaction to that? And what is that reaction? Is the reaction, well, that we change some of the rules so that we get a better internet? Or is the reaction some flavor of preemption of the state's ability to regulate or to legislate on certain areas, including the internet? And so, the reason I'm sharing this, and not to go out on a pessimistic note here, but there is right now a mini law shoved into a budget reconciliation bill at the federal level, which seeks to preempt regulation on AI for 10 years, a 10-year moratorium on regulating AI. Now, the problem with just regulating AI is that there's a open question as to where one leaves off when you're regulating AI and where you start regulating child protection issues and certainly privacy issues. And so, one could see a world where the federal government just says, you know what, enough of the great state experiment. Now, part of me thinks that's a great thing because there are some things that I think the states are doing which are that are driving the business community crazy for, I would argue, no good reason. The downside to that is that all of this energy that you're seeing coalesce with state AGs now suing and all these state laws, that there's a chance that may ultimately go up in smoke.
It's all about money, Alan. So it always is about money at the end of the day. The tobacco industry was able to hold off regulations forever and ever and ever. You've got the same situation with firearms. The reason that the AI is seeking its 10-year moratorium is because the growth of AI companies is in triple digits quarter on quarter at the moment. So if you're an investor and you've got a lot of money and you want to put your money into turn $1 million into $1 billion, and the best place to put it for the next 20 years is going to be in AI. And so the big money is telling the big politics that it wants to have no regulation on AI so it can run another Wild West experiment on AI. It's also the reason why the big tech companies, the people that everybody thought would never be touched by government, like Google and Meta and others, are coming under attack, because Google grew only 14% last year, and in the past quarter, it's grown slower than the S&P. So putting your $1 million into Google is now a bad outcome. You should be investing in cat boxes or veterinary science, right? And so that's starting to run the end of its race. So it no longer has the protection of big money. The big money wants to protect AI. And so the connection between money and politics can't be ignored. But at the end of the day, politics will make a decision that ultimately gets them elected. And sometimes that's the money, but more often than not, it's also the public. So we all, as parents, have a responsibility as well to keep the pressure on the politicians to say, hey, look, I'm not going to vote for you unless you protect my kid from this stuff. So AI undoubtedly is creating a new Wild West on the web. I get it. And that's going to happen. Well, not even on the web, but in digital. Okay. And that's going to happen. But as I said, we've learned a lot from this first 25 years of running wildly at the wall. Hopefully now we'll be a bit more smart about what we do next. And I'd also add what I say every week when we're on here, Alan, is that there's a whole wide world out there that's not just America that are making slightly different decisions here. And so we may very well see that the laws in each country are increasingly different to what they are just in America. But I'm not pessimistic. I'm actually quite optimistic at this moment. I think the only way you can stop a giant problem is by biting off little bits and fixing it. If we're going to fix social media in this era, that will be a win. If we're going to fix monopolization and reoxygenate the premium web, then I see that as a win. That we're starting to bank wins, not just bank dollars. And that's actually a good outcome.
Yeah, agree completely.
All right. Well, we've got some work to do then, it sounds like, mate.
We do.
So let's keep this, let's keep an eye on this case. I know we've put out some calls to a whole load of people that have been victims of this. I'm hoping to get some of them to come and join us on this in the future. But Alan, thanks for bringing this case to my attention, mate. And, let's keep on going.
Let's keep knocking them out of the park, Ricky.
All right. Next time.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in. The Future Media Podcast is a production of Future Media and Ricky Sutton.